I'm working on a city exploration game where every building can be entered, and it's time to set my city on fire. In my last devlog, I talked about how I added interactive liquids to the environment, so this time I will be talking about dynamic and interactive fire. And to be clear, I am not just implementing random mechanics because it's fun, even though it is. I have a list of game mechanics that will play a role in the future gameplay missions, and I'm starting with the most challenging ones, which are liquids that I implemented already, and now fire. But first a shout out to my patrons on Patreon. You guys keep me going, and I'm very grateful for all your support. So to start a fire, we first need a source of fire. In Vuntra City, there are now open flames that are located in some of the interiors and exteriors, such as candles, fireplaces, and fire pits. These flames are contained, so they won't grow or spread on their own, but there is a way to make them do so. Later on, I might add other sources of fire, such as lighters, or I don't know, I'm sure I'll think of something. But for now, it's just these decorative flames. You can interact with the flames by pouring liquids into them, which either put them out if the liquid is non-flammable, or make the fire grow and spread if it is flammable. I set the drinks with special properties, for example glowing ones, to be flammable for now, but I might change the rules on what is and isn't flammable later on. Once the flame is no longer contained, it is able to absorb nearby flames, spread, and grow. In order to represent this dynamic fire, I had to implement a special particle system that scales from a candle flame all the way to a large raging fire. Its smallest form, the candle flame, is just a ribbon renderer with a texture, but I kinda like how it looks. And as the flame grows, the ribbon fades out and more particle emitters activate. There are fire sprites that are fairly standard for a fire effect: heat distortion, sparkles, ash bursts, smoke particles, and, in order to ground the flame and make it look less floaty, I've also added embers that fall down to the ground and emit flame tongues. I've also had to adjust the speeds and lifetimes of each particle emitter for different sizes of flames to have somewhat realistic values, as simply scaling those things with size made smaller flames look like they are burning in slow motion. I also made sure that all of those particles can vary in color just like everything else in Vuntra City. I didn't create this whole particle system from scratch though. I saved myself some time by modifying an existing fire asset, but it was still quite a bit of work to adapt it to my needs. This about covers the particle effects, so now let's talk about the mechanics. The fire spreads in individual flames that have a location and a radius. At any moment in time, each flame does three things: grow at a certain rate, absorb any smaller flames within its radius, and spread in random directions at a certain interval. All of these are configurable to make sure the flames don't spread too quickly, but also don't stay static. This of course doesn't apply to the contained flames mentioned earlier, like the candles. Each flame also has an age, and it will burn out eventually. Right now, I am even slightly changing the hue of older flames to make it easier to tell which ones are about to burn out. Now here's the tricky part. On one hand, I want the flames to be able to spread just like a real fire does in a flammable environment, but on the other hand, particle systems and flame calculations are expensive. So I can't cover the entire city with fire because that would overwhelm even the most powerful hardware. So I am imposing a few artificial limitations on how much the flame will spread. On one hand, we already can't have too many flames in a small space because they absorb each other. So if, for example, we put 10 candles next to each other and make them grow, they won't grow as 10 separate particle systems. They will eventually just merge into one. But fire spreading horizontally is a different story. In order to spread, each flame makes a trace to check whether there is space for it to spread. And if it's in a small room, it simply won't have the space to spread and die down eventually. But what happens in an open space? In order to stop the flame from spreading uncontrollably, but still continue burning and evolving, I am calculating clusters of flames and limiting the size of each cluster. By cluster, I mean flames that are close together within a certain threshold. Right now, I have limited each cluster to a maximum of 8 flames, beyond which they stop spreading. But as the older flames in a cluster start burning out, as I mentioned earlier, it gains the ability to spread once again until it reaches the maximum again, thus constantly evolving while staying somewhat contained. On top of that, I have implemented a special mechanic for interior fires, where if there is a flame cluster of maximum size in any given interior, the entire interior becomes engulfed in fire for a while. This fire works differently and can't be put out, but it will go out on its own after a while and will have consequences for the interior later on once I implement interior modifications. Also, I gotta mention that the NPCs do not react to the flames right now, but they will eventually. And since I'm not making a terrorism simulator, all of them will survive even the worst fires and evacuate safely. Now, I've talked about the particle effects I use for the flames, but fire also emits light and sound, and I'd like to briefly touch on the solutions that I'm using for those things, as they are also non-trivial. The problem with them is that putting a source of light and a sound on each flame is pretty computationally expensive, so I needed a better way to go about it. There is a sound solution that only uses a handful of sound emitters to emulate sounds coming from an area, which came in handy for me. What it does is calculate an average position, volume, and spread for each type of sound that all of the fires should be emitting, and then use just one audio source to represent it, changing its position and parameters dynamically as the player moves around. This is what it sounds like in the game. Take a listen. Shout out to Runavision for covering it in his blog. Saved me a lot of time and effort for the implementation. I put a link in the description if you're curious how it works. And as for the lights, I initially tried something similar but quickly realized that it makes no sense, as lights can't just come from an average location between the flames, but should stick to them precisely. So I created my own system of a limited number of light sources, I'm only using 2 right now, that jump to the closest fires while fading smoothly between them. It's not perfect, but it's better than nothing and very efficient performance-wise. So to summarize, now we have contained fires burning in various interiors and exteriors. And by the way, the outdoor fires, like these terrace fire pits, will go out in the rain and start back again once the rain is over. Also, any items marked as flammable, such as books, documents, and magazines, will get destroyed if they touch any flame. Right now they get destroyed instantly, but I might add a more gradual burning effect to it later on. The flames can get out of control and start spreading when they come in contact with a flammable liquid. Then they either naturally burn out or take over an entire interior and still go out eventually. The only thing that's missing is the ability to put the flames out. As I mentioned before, pouring non-flammable liquid on the fire extinguishes it, but only if the fire is small enough. There's a hidden calculation of whether the volume of the poured liquid is enough to cover the flame's area. This is why a candle is easy to put out, but a larger fire may not be affected nearly as much. That's why I added fire extinguishers to every interior. These things can put out flames of any size except for the interior wildfires. They can be found near the elevator, on every single floor. Fun fact, the fire extinguisher is technically a weapon, so it uses weapon mechanics. This is literally the first weapon in Vuntra City. Probably not the last though. Well, this is it for the fire mechanics, and if you have any questions, leave them down in the comments. Stay creative!